Hey everybody, it's Kathy Klotz-Guest of Keeping It Human, and we are back with another Hangout. And I love doing all these different sort of videos and experiential kinds of things. And Jeff and I were talking before we went live. I jumped into Periscope head first, and boy, that was kind of learning. But that's okay. I don't mind getting my feet wet and figuring out how it works, and then making progress. It can only go up from there. So that's what I figure. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to fellow storytellers. This vehicle, I've got my podcast, I've got my innovation and improv cafe, and this vehicle is really designed to talk to people who are doing storytelling in really interesting ways. So I love this venue, and I love the Hangouts because I get to talk to some really cool people. So today, our guest is Jeff Echols. You can see it's Echols. And Jeff, before I introduce you, what's your Twitter handle?
It's at Jeff_Echols. So at JEFF_ECHOLS.
Awesome. I would not have guessed the underscore because I can't remember. And I'm at Kathy Klotz-Guest. And Keeping It Human helps businesses tell their stories, and we help them tell their stories in a way that humanizes them. And Jeff does something very similar. He's a fellow storyteller and a kind of what I like to call as a sojourner of truth. We're out there trying to, highlight businesses' truths and tell those stories. He helps businesses and individuals craft those stories around their passion, their value, and their purpose. And isn't that really the ultimate test of storytelling? If we've done that well, we've done that for businesses. So welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. And the other thing I want to say about Jeff, because I think it's really cool, is he was an architect. I don't think you practice architecture or do that now, but
Nope.
You are a licensed architect. You went to architecture school. So I think that's actually really cool.
Well, it's a fun talking point. And to be clear, I'm not a licensed architect. I don't practice architecture, but because of that background, that's where a lot of my client base comes from. I have 20 some odd years. We won't get too technical on that. Start counting the gray hairs, but a lot of years, a couple decades or more of experience in that world. So it's a great tie-in for those type clients.
Absolutely, and that's okay because I'm not a licensed comedian. I do it without a license, so. So we don't
wild and free.
That's right. We don't need a stinking license. That's all right. But I think it is interesting because what I love about storytelling, and I love talking to fellow storytellers such as yourself, because the storytelling tent is so broad and big and beautiful and wonderful, and everybody brings something different to the table. That's what's so fun and rich about storytelling, is that through each storyteller, through his or her lens and their background, has something different that they've seen, experienced, and they bring that to their work. And I know that for some of us, we think, oh, that's just a data point in our past, but I really do believe that all these different experiences sort of make us who we are and give us that lens through which we see things. And as somebody who's done stage work for many, many years, as well as branding work in high-tech companies, I see things in my own way. You're going to see things in your way as a builder, as somebody who has that experience. And I just think there's the people out there who have the PhDs in mythology, and I think everybody brings something to the table that's actually really rich. And I think storytelling is so wonderful. And that's what's so great, is that we're all storytellers and we're all trying to better the craft. We just look at things really differently.
Yeah, we do. And it's, every client that we work with, every client that you work with, every client that I work with, obviously they have different backgrounds. But this conversation that we get into a lot is, take architects, for instance. There are a lot of, where I am in Indianapolis, for some reason, there are more than a handful of school architects. They specialize in schools. And so when we work with those clients and, you start to talk about things like, what's your differentiator? What makes you different than the other school architects? It's that lens that you're talking about, that experience, whether you want to talk about their origin story or their why, with a nod to Simon Sinek, why do you do what you do? It's that lens that helps us craft that story. If you've got 3 school architects, we can craft 3 different stories for each of them because that lens is different.
And you've talked about this, I know, and it's something that we both are passionate about, is you just mentioned it, your why and your purpose and knowing why you do what you do. Do you find in your work that businesses have really examined that and they're clear in it, they just don't know how to articulate it? Or do you find that you sometimes have to really roll back things because they haven't really thought about it in that way?
What surprises me, I guess, is how many times you have to roll it back.
Yeah.
We were talking about Periscope earlier, and I did a Periscope. It was either Monday. Well, today's only Wednesday, so either Monday or yesterday. I did a Periscope, and so when I do mine, every day I talk about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
What a coincidence. And I usually take the topic from a conversation or client work that I was working on earlier in the day. And I think it was Monday. I was giving the example because I was working with a client, and they are a management consulting group, and we've been going over this. We've been in this trough longer than we should have, examining the why for this particular client. And they're having a really hard time articulating it, really getting to what their why is. And that has always surprised me. And I guess part of that is just my personal makeup. It's, what are you passionate about? What is it that you do that you're passionate about? Why is it, and the example I was using on Monday was this particular client, because they were having a really hard time getting to that point. Some do, some don't. But I really do. I say this all the time. That's the first question I ask every client. What's your why?
What's your why?
That's where I start with everybody. And if we can't get past that point, then we've got an issue. But there's never been a case where we haven't been able to get there. Sometimes it's a little more work than expected.
I totally agreed. It stuns me that there are a lot of companies out there who haven't really thought about their why. And I, as somebody who is a storyteller like you, it's like, to us, it's unimaginable. We take it for granted that if you don't know why you get up in the morning and have that reason that you're on fire, how you're going to help your clients, it's very hard to sort of, make decisions every day and have some kind of GPS system for which you make those decisions. And your why helps you focus that. And I don't know how people go through without a why, but I do see something similar, and I see it with high tech firms that are running hard and fast. And I see it with a lot of hosted solution firms, like software as a solution firms. And I run into this because, they you ask them what your why is, and it's, to provide a hosted solution. It's like, no, that's your how. That's your how. Yeah. That's how you deliver the product, but that's not your why. And it's interesting. It's, you do see some firms really struggle with it. And it is something that you can, it's surmountable, but until you get to that point, it's really hard to focus the lens of that origin story if you really don't know. And, are there things, I'm just curious, in your experience, are there things that when you see that, how do you have them go through the self-examination? And what are the questions that maybe you guide them through to help them uncover that? Because they probably have it in their mind somewhere. They have something. They just haven't really reflected on it, or they just don't know how to articulate it clearly. So how do you draw that out?
My approach is very conversational. There are people that have their surveys and everything, but just like we're doing now, I want to have a conversation. So it's, we may just start talking about history, about ideal clients, trying to trigger something in their mind that helps with that. And many times you run into cases where maybe there's been some transition over time. The current ownership or the current leadership is not, they're not the original leadership. They're not the ones that founded the firm, et cetera. If we're not talking about a startup or something like that. And so maybe there is something lost in translation. And so, then the conversation might turn to, they brought you into this leadership for a reason. Why'd they bring you? Why did they bring you in? What was the situation before you got here? What was that transition like? And just trying to explore, not necessarily, put them on the couch, but just try to dig in there somewhere and see what nuggets there are.
Right. Little Freudian approach to psychoanalyzing your clients. Probably not something that we would recommend.
Yeah, well, we get the drill out, and start.
Exactly. Kind of go what's in there. It is interesting too. I see this a lot as well, and I think it's a related issue. Is they don't know their why, so there tends to be sometimes a gap between their why, or their articulation of their why, and what they think the why is for their clients. And sometimes that's an issue. I was talking to a company not too long ago, and they're a software company, which there's a lot of here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because they were positioning their product as a fix for a problem, but it ended up being a problem that their clients didn't recognize as being true. So you're solving a problem that your client says, that's not our problem. So you've got your why story completely wrong.
Right.
And so part of understanding your value and your why story is really, to me, if you're saying we're going to, fix this in the world, well, do your clients really have that issue? And is there a connection here? If you're fixing a problem that your customer says, well, that's not our big issue, and you're really not going to be successful. And I have actually seen that with companies that are running so hard and so fast that for them it's opportunity, and it's very opportunistic. So this client has this issue, then this client has this, and they're chasing whatever clients in front of them versus stepping back and saying, these are the categories of problems that we solve. And I don't know if you see that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think how important is empathy, right? I mean, when you are trying to understand your client's why or your client's needs, I mean, listening, I think, is one of the most important aspects of storytelling. And so if you have a client, if you have someone in that leadership group that isn't naturally empathetic to their clients, their ideal clients, their customers, that may be a struggle. And I think, there's so much advice out there about starting a business based on a problem that you identify. And that's good. That's good advice. I mean, you're in business to solve problems. I've got a little tab on my website that says problems we solve.
Yeah.
That's why we're in business. But you're right. I mean, if you are assuming problems and not listening to your clients, to your customers, then you have exactly what you identified. It's you've got this problem. So I think, to be a good storyteller, you've got to be a great listener.
Yeah, so true. It's interesting. I think so much of what we do as storytellers, and I think where things are with content marketing today, there's so much, I think, noise, and there's so much emphasis on the telling part that I think you hit it on the head. We're not listening enough, it seems to me. And the empathy part really is missing. And I find that really fascinating, because if you don't know what the problems of your customer are every day, like, what is that whole customer experience? Where are you going to know where you fit in and how you solve things? And I find that just fascinating, because I think everyone's so obsessed, I think, with storytelling and the resurgence of storytelling, which is super important. And I sometimes think we're telling the wrong stories. We're not telling the stories in the most human way that we should be, which, something that I work on with clients. And we don't seem to be, to your point, just really listening and stepping back and saying, all right, here's my story, but where does it hurt for you? And is my story really taking into account what hurts for you? And I just hope I'd like to see marketing get a little bit better at that. But I think everybody's jumped on the storytelling bandwagon. And I sometimes talk to executives who say, I have to have storytelling, but they're not really sure why they need it and what they're going to talk about. And I think there's just this content marketing bandwagon that I sometimes just want to push the driver, take out and commandeer the whole vehicle. And, it's just, let's take it back to empathy. Let's start with empathy. So.
Yeah. I mean, case in point, I'm working with a firm right now doing training for their leadership, ongoing training. And they came to me because they feel like they've been pigeonholed into a certain project type with their clients, understanding that they can provide much greater services, larger scope services than they currently do, related to what they're currently providing. But they're working with higher ed clients, government clients, and so perhaps they're meeting with a project manager, and the project manager has his blinders on. Okay, well, here's my provider for this type project, and they want to get out of that. So part of what we're talking about is listening. You're having this conversation. Many of these clients are 20-year-old, or not 20-year-olds, but clients for 20 years. Long-term clients.
Yeah.
And it's a very familiar conversation. You get together, you have a conversation, you know who their kids are, all of these things. So what we're doing right now is working on training. It's like, okay, listening training, learn to identify signals where you can start to change that story, where you can start to step in and say, well, we can also do this. We can help you solve that. And it's a different conversation, because it's not what this client is used to hearing. It's not the type of project this client is used to turning to my client for. And so that's part of it. It's you've got to listen, understand, okay, you're really good at solving this problem.
Yeah.
And that has been your story with this particular client for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we start to change that story so that you can expand those services? You can solve more, take care of more of that client's pain, and you can become more profitable. You can expand that scope. You can have more work coming in the door through the same clients that you already have.
Yeah.
And then if you're able to prove that you can meet those needs, then you have these other potential clients that are out there. Then it's just a straight shot for them. You don't have to make that transition that you're making with these existing clients. Is a straight shot using essentially the same storytelling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that's so important, what you just said. And I think that if you've got the right framework for storytelling, it should be flexible enough to accommodate changes in products or services. And I think people do get really attached to the product service level, and it's never about the products or services, because they'll change, they'll evolve as if you've got longevity in your firm, it's going to come and go. It's going to change based on, clients' changing needs. But the general story of who you are and what you care about in the world probably doesn't. And if you've got the right framework for that, it'll be expansive enough for you. And so I think it is being able to go back and look at the commonality of your products. And if you're struggling with your story, sometimes I say to clients, they should have had a story before they started. They didn't, and that's okay. And that's why they're in pain. And they come to me, and I'll say, well, step back and look at all the commonalities of your products. What's the common thread of all these pain points that you help alleviate? Because that's really the umbrella story for everything that you do. And sometimes it is important, if you've been in business long enough, and you just said it, 20 years, you're going to go through these dips and valleys. And your clients are going to change, their needs are going to change. And sometimes your story needs a little bit of tweaking. And you have to understand what the commonality across all these things is. And I think that's something that a lot of companies don't step back and take the time to ask themselves and step back and look at their big story. I think they're too busy chasing campaigns and leads.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't know if you see that. I know that's something I see a lot. And when somebody brings me in, they want me to focus on the tactical campaign level. I'm like, that's not the right way to use me at all. And that's not where I should focus, because you need to be up here at your bigger story. Right.
Yeah. One thing that happens in the architecture and engineering world is the request for proposals, request for qualifications, RFP and RFQ processes. And so, I get a lot of marketing directors that'll reach out to me and say, hey, we need help with this. We need to understand this. And usually their problem is, the way that firms will structure their marketing efforts is they'll put this marketing director instead of in charge of the strategy, if they even have one, they'll put them in charge of creating the submittals, creating the submissions to these RFPs and RFQs. And, it's all, if we think about, deadline driven ideas, I mean, this is extremely deadline driven. The state has out an RFP for something. It's it's got a drop dead date. If you don't get it in, you're not in
Yeah.
consideration. And so they're going along with blinders on. And okay, I've got to get this RFP and this RFQ and this and this and this and this. All of these have to be filed on these dates and these dates.
Yeah.
And that idea of strategy goes out the window. Number one, it's like you said. I mean, they're flying so fast and furious towards a certain point, but they don't even know where that point is. It's just here's the next one, and here's the next one, and here's the next one. They let that strategy, they let that umbrella story go because they're filling out forms. Is essentially what's happening, and it's interesting in this business or in the architecture, the AEC world. They talk about, people throw around this figure that says that 80% of new work comes from referrals and past clients, and so you step back for a minute and you think about that. It's like, that's all relationships. And so what's better for building relationships than having these great stories, being able to tell stories that these people that you come in contact with, that they'll remember, that'll resonate with them, and they'll share those same stories. Storytelling fits so well into that statistic. But at the same time, these marketing directors are creating submittals for that latest RFP or RFQ. And so there can be a huge disconnect, not only in the AEC world. I know that happens other places, but it's a really poignant thing in the AEC industry, and it's a real shame. But it's also sort of low hanging fruit, if you will.
Right.
Just think, if you tweak that just a little, think about the amount of success. Exponential success that you could have just from one little tweak like that.
Yeah. And you see that a lot. I mean, I don't know the specifics of AEC. However, when you look at a lot of very older kind of conservative industries, financial services, all these different things, it tends to be very similar because people are afraid to tweak the story. They're afraid to look at the big story. They're afraid to take risks and tell their story in new ways. And I see that a lot. And I would suspect, if there's a history and you've got a legacy with your firm in AEC, you're hesitant to maybe change, and you're still probably very conservative in the way that you're doing your marketing. Are you seeing with some of these maybe more conservative industries are you seeing any kind of openness to changing the way they think about story? Are you seeing people incorporate more of the newer tools and storytelling methods? Are you seeing millennials come up in these firms and say, you know what, we should rethink things. We should do things differently. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, as probably as younger leadership, but as people become more aware of some of the tools that are out there, when I talk about storytelling, what I try to do is split it into a couple pieces. There's the crafting piece,
right?
And storytelling can be written, it can be oral, it can be video, it can be a lot of different mediums, right? And then there's the telling piece, which, for the sake of discussion, is the distribution. So is it on your blog? Is it a TED Talk? Is it your YouTube channel? What is that? And so as people become more aware and more enamored with, oh, well, what's this Snapchat thing? Or, we were talking about Periscope or Blab or something like that. I do get more questions.
Yeah.
Now, many times those are misguided, right? Hey, can you help us with Facebook advertising? Or I get this question the other day, are we boosting our Facebook posts? And unfortunately, the filter went down, and I said, do you even know what boosting Facebook posts means?
They're like, no, but I got to have it because everybody else says I have to have it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the discussion becomes about engagement, right? I can spend your money for you if you want on boosting posts, but if we can create engagement, we can get more organic reach. In the particular case here, it's a not-for-profit, so there's a board involved and there's members and this, that, and the other. Just think, if more than 2 people in your organization actually shared your messaging, what we could do, on on the distribution side, on the telling side. Think of what we could do without spending your money on boosting your posts.
Yeah.
I call that hitting the morphine button, but
that's too much.
yeah.
It's a great analogy, and it's so true. And it's like, that's usually, to your point, it's like, that's usually the least of their worries. And, because before they've gotten to that point, there's usually something, and I think you're alluding to this, and it's a really important point, that there's something off maybe in the way that the story is crafted. So let's just make sure the story is sharp and it works. Then let's worry about the channels, and whether, and if you're mired in the, whether or not you're boosting a post, or you're doing Facebook advertising, or you're doing native Facebook video, those choices become irrelevant. And it's funny, I've had these same conversations, and it's like, let's not worry about how we're going to get the story out just yet. And let's think about the story, and then once we have the story, let's worry about the content. But we're in a world where, again, the content marketing bandwagon, everyone's hung up on content. And what I'm seeing is a real fragmentation of content, that often for a lot of companies, their story is nowhere in there because they are chasing these different shiny objects. It's the Snapchat thing, then it's the Instagram thing, and now we got to be on Pinterest, and now we got to be in this. But there's no cohesive story that ties them all together, because they've chased tools and not stories. And I know that I have to then back them up. Let's back up a little bit. Let's back up a little bit, and let's tie it together with a story. And I think if you're chasing tools, you end up in that fragmented content marketing situation that we're talking about.
Yeah. I had an amazing discussion this morning with a publisher that, they're a traditional print publishing house or publisher, and they're ready to move over to digital. Which, okay, well, this is 2015.
It's good thing you're ready. You're ahead of the curve.
but they, the question was, where do we start?
Yeah.
And so when I get into those discussions, which happens a lot, you're talking to startups. I talk to a lot of startups. I talk to a lot of not-for-profits as well. Where do we start? And usually, other than why, other than what's this overall story that we're trying to tell, when they want to get into that tactical discussion, it's the direction that I try to guide them is two things. It's, what are you good at? Is it photography? Is it video? Is it podcasting? What is it? So that's a part of it.
Yeah.
But also, when you're considering your audience and where they are and how you're going to reach them, it's what medium is really appropriate for the story, and where your audience wants to be reached with it. And but you're right. I mean, let's stay away from the tactics. Let's stay away from the tools. Just like we talked about before, it's, what's your why? And if we're having trouble defining the why, we certainly shouldn't be talking about the tools and tactics.
Right.
But it's like you called it the shiny object. It's exactly right. It's, oh, did you see that?
Squirrel.
Exactly. We just watched Christmas Vacation last night, and we saw the squirrel scene.
It's like, because I have a golden lab named Buddy, and he's just the sweetest dog on the planet. But that's just it. It's like he'll be playing with my son, and then all of a sudden a squirrel, and he's like, huh? and it's completely that sort of mentality. And it's hard. I think we're living in a world where there's new tools coming out all the time, and so the opportunities for telling your story expand, and they're exponential. And so I think that becomes very hard to manage. And I think it is important to remind customers and clients to back up and look at the bigger story first. And startups, so let's talk about startups, because I know you work with startups, I've worked with startups, and startups are an interesting case. And when you're working with startups, I worked at startups back in the day, where it's the very first thing a startup did in Silicon Valley anyway, is they got VC money or angel funded, and then they went and they got a PR agency. Right. And they paid a retainer. Not anymore. Those days have changed, let me tell you. But in the day, that's what they did. And, they focused on, PR and tactics and press releases rather than look at stories. And I think startups are a lot smarter now, and the choices are different. What are you seeing as sort of, when you're dealing with startups, what's their tendency towards storytelling? How are they doing it? What are they thinking about? What are you seeing?
Well, I think the best of the best are doing what we talked about earlier. It's they have, hopefully they've identified a problem that they're going to solve
Mm-hmm.
and figured out who the audience is, who is it that has this problem, and so they can start to build a tribe around this idea, around
Mm-hmm.
this problem. Okay, well, you've got problem X. There's a tribe of people that have that same,
Yeah.
or there's a tribe of people that have that same problem. So let's start building a community around that. And once you're to that point, and you start building that tribe, that community, that audience, then you can start to talk about things like the origin story. You can start
Mm-hmm.
to craft stories around how this, whether it's a widget or it's whatever it is, how it solves problem X, how it speaks to your pain. And I think the ones that do that, I think number one, it's a pretty sound business practice, but I think they are the most successful in crafting and telling their stories, because it starts with that first little nugget. It starts with the why. This is why you design this widget. This is why you're
Mm-hmm.
doing whatever it is that you're doing, and everything just sort of grows organically out of that. And I think they're the most successful. They're not trying to game the systems. They're not trying to skip these steps, and they understand that we're building this on something for a reason,
Right.
for an audience, and they keep expanding on that, and that's what I'm seeing as being the most successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think startups have gotten a lot savvier about how to engage with story. I do still see, probably because where I sit, it's being steeped in San Jose and Silicon Valley, there's still a lot of, leading with technology rather than story. I still see that. And it's something that I do work with firms on to help them kind of conquer that. There's still a lot of that. There's still a lot of this mentality of, and that's why I love the HBO Silicon Valley, the show. It just cracks me up because, man, I could tell you stories, but then I'd have to, and I know where the bodies are buried, and it's like, having come out of high tech, it's so much of that is so funny because it's so true. And we're so busy trying to have, fancy name and the right board and all the stuff that I still see companies not able to do that. But I think the threshold and the tolerance level is a lot lower. Back in the day when money was free flowing, VCs would put up with that. Now they won't, because their time horizons for getting their money back is a lot shorter, and they won't allow their money in their investment to be wasted. So I'm seeing a lot more emphasis on, let's identify who the earlier adopters are. Let's design for our ideal market. Let's get feedback. Let's, agile prototyping. Let's get something out very quickly. Figure out on the cheap whether it's going to fail, succeed, whatever. If it works, then let's figure out how to, what's the minimum viable product. Now let's build a story about, using our early adopters. Let them tell the story about the problem that we solved, and story becomes a much more organic thing. And I think you're right. For the companies that are doing it that way, they're much more successful. And I think the days are gone where you'll hire a PR agency and have them be on record because you think you're already thinking pre-IPO, but that's a very different model. And I think, thanks to Kickstarter and all these different places, there is a rise of the very savvy startup, and I'm seeing that. Not enough of them, but I'm seeing more of that, which is great.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah.
Not too good. We still need work. We need job security.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it's good.
That's always going to be there.
Yeah.
That's always going to be there. But to your point, to your brand, you're keeping it human.
Yeah.
I think there's so many benefits to the scenario that you just described, right? You basically mentioned user-generated content, essentially. Here's the stories. Here are the people that we reached out to. Here are the people that helped us understand the problem. Here are the people, and they are generating these stories. And the benefit is, number one, you know that it's human. You know that it connects, it resonates with people because they have already they gave you the story. They've helped you craft that story, and it's less expensive on some level. I had a firm out in New Jersey that designed a beautiful museum, an award-winning museum. And, the way architectural photography, and this is another architecture example, I guess, but the way architectural photography usually happens is you hire these great photographers, and they go out and they take these pristine photographs of these buildings and the landscape and or the urban environment or whatever it is. And there are no people in them. Yeah. Here's this great building, and look at that detail, and all these things.
I've always wondered about that.
Yeah, part of it is ego, honestly.
Yeah.
It's here's my work of art. But the problem is, okay, great, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Can't deny that. That won an award. That's great. Can't deny that. But what about that human connection? So in working with this firm on this new museum, we've got these Instagram communities around the world. There's IGers Indianapolis, and there's probably IGers San Jose or whatever. We were able to get in contact with the Instagram community where this museum was, gave them access to the museum, and they had one of their meetup days. And now you have, in this case, almost 100 professional and amateur photographers crawling all over this museum, taking beautiful photographs from the point of view of a user. And it became very, very human and free.
Yeah.
Absolutely free. And of course, you're just resharing all of their photographs, but what an incredible story thread that comes from these photographers and the people that actually use this museum. And it became a very different product than paying sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to send a professional photographer out there to take a very what's the word I want?
Sterile.
A very sterile. That's exactly a very sterile photograph or
Yeah.
series of photographs, and it was a wonderful product and result.
It's interesting because I never really think about that, but listening to you, you're right. I mean, I have a cousin who has a general contractor's license and is an architect, and I remember looking at his office, all the magazines, and there's never people in it. And part of why you build something is that there's a human factor. I told you about my parents' first Eichler home, and it's about artificial lighting and being a livable space, which means there's a human being at the center of this livable space, right?
And novel.
And isn't that what a concept, people, right? And it cracks me up. And I would look at these pictures, and it's so funny you say that, because not being an architect, but from the human lens, you're right. It just always felt sterile to me. It felt like hospital photos, because the space is designed to work for people. And if it doesn't work for people and it's sterile, what's the point? And what a lovely example, because spaces are meant to be lived in and used and work for people, and museums are meant for people. And so who would have thought?
A long time ago, a really long time ago, when I was in school, I was sitting in an architecture history class, which is basically slides up on the screen. Here's this, here's that. And this professor put up a slide of, I think it was Union Station, St. Louis, maybe, but it was Union Station somewhere. And he talked about how popular space was, and the human scale, and this, that, and the other. These are all these architecture terms, right? And there was a young woman in the class that said, "Wait a minute. If this is such a popular space, if this is such a human place, why are there no people in the photographs?"
Wow.
And that was one of those drop the mic moments. You're telling us about this, but there are no people in the photographs. And if you take that example and flip it over to marketing and to storytelling, if you are telling stories, if you're doing marketing that's not connecting with human beings, you've got a problem.
Yeah,
because
something's wrong.
human, that's your consumer. No
Yeah.
matter what you are, if you're a professional services firm,
Yeah.
if you sell widgets, if you have customers, clients of any type, they are human beings.
Hmm.
Even if it's B2B, corporation to corporation, there are people somewhere that are making that transaction. So if you're not connecting your storytelling to human beings, you've got a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. What a concept. And yet it's true. There's so many stories out there that are so sterile. And I've written about this. I wrote about, a couple months ago, I wrote this post, and it seemed to resonate with people. And, it's, your company is not a protagonist. And it can't be, our company did this and our company did that. And, you can't get your arms around a company and hug it or throttle it. You'd like to. It's not a human being. And you can't frame this corporate entity as hero or protagonist in a story. And it just, I think it's changing, but I still see that with a lot of the bigger corporations. You don't see that as much with startups because they don't have the legacy, but you see that with the big corporate veil. And I think those days are gone. A company cannot afford to do what you just described, which is alienate people. And there has to be people somewhere in it. So, I always say and I've had conversations with very conservative banks and very conservative financial firms, and they always want to say the company. I'm like, you got to stop it because it doesn't work. And they're shocked. They're just shocked because they just can't believe that, they can't be the protagonist in that story. And I'm like, you're not. You're just not. You're a bank. Do you know, every year there's an Edelman Trust Barometer. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Jeff, but in the Edelman Trust Barometer, for those of you who will see this video, every year the big PR agency and brand agency, Edelman, goes out and they look at trust around the world. And, tobacco companies, very low. Governments, very low. Banks, very low. So, I'm jokingly saying to this board, it's like, I don't know if you've heard this lately, but y'all don't have a lot of credibility. So when I start busting out my Southern accent, I'm serious. And you don't have a lot of credibility. So you can't afford to then have this corporate entity veil anymore. And it's really interesting because I think it gets to what you're saying. If your storytelling isn't resonating, you've got to do something different. And I see this with a lot of conservative, older industries that, some of them don't get it. But the smaller banks, like the credit unions they are starting to get it. Oh, millennials, we need millennial money. We need to attract millennials. Oh, we better do something different. But there are still companies out there that think that corporate face to the world is the story. And they're going to go dragging, kicking and screaming, I think, into the next couple of years. Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to empathy for your audience.
Yeah.
What is it that your audience needs to hear? And when I'm speaking to architects, a lot of times I'll use the example of a community center. You just won an award for this beautiful community center. This is a real life example. Someone had hired me to help them craft stories around a few of the projects that they had completed. One of them was an award-winning community center, and I delivered the final draft to them, and they said, "Wait a minute. This doesn't say anything about us." You're exactly right. This is about a community center. It's not about you. And we talk about hero's journey.
Right.
You can be the hero of your own story, but so what I'll tell them is, you think about you think about that person that wants to build a community center.
Yeah.
This is a person that has probably run a not-for-profit for a while, and they have this real passion for giving kids a safe place to go do homework or play basketball or whatever after school, if that's the focus of their community center. And so when they wake up in the morning and they're rolling out of bed, the first thought that pops into my head, guaranteed, is not, I want to hire an award-winning architect.
You're right.
The first thought that pops into their head in the morning is, how do I give kids a safe place to go after school? And so your storytelling, if you're an award-winning community center designer, your storytelling is not about your awards. There's a time and place to celebrate.
Right.
But your storytelling is around that pain, that thought when they wake up. That's how do I give kids a safe place to go after school? And that's what your storytelling has to be about. You've got to have that empathy to listen and understand what it is your audience is thinking about and what they want to and need to hear.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And I love that example because it says it all, doesn't it? It's such a rich example of like, companies just thinking that it's really, they're the hero in the hero's journey story. And it really isn't. And your example is a perfect one. This is about the kids, and this is about the dream and the story of them needing a safe space. And that's the interesting thing with a lot of nonprofit storytelling I have found is that, sometimes at a high level, and I know not every nonprofit is falls into this, but at a high level, I see a lot of we need money. The story is we need money, and it's like, no, the story is that your clients, the communities that you serve, have no other choice, and you put a human face on your clients who have benefited from the work that you do. That's the story. The story isn't you and you needing money, and that's a really lousy story.
Right.
And so it's really getting people to, and organizations to think differently about the story focused on their end user.
Right.
Different mindset.
Mindset. I was at a not-for-profit fundraiser a few weeks ago, and I was worried there was going to be, a lot of that we need money. It was a fundraiser. I mean, that's plain and simple. That's what it was. They had a huge corporate match, and this is their once a year. This is their big deal, and they did such a great job of the storytelling. They brought up teachers. It's an organization. It's called Art with the Heart. It's an organization that provides arts education for kids at risk, is what it is. And they brought up teachers and they brought up students, and the stories were amazing. And at some point, I guarantee there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
Yeah.
And that's what you've got to do. It's not about saying we need $50,000 for this match. It's about this is the impact. These are the teachers that benefit or are able to pass this on to these kids. The idea that I don't remember, it was something like they have $1 per kid to spend on art supplies. Wow. At some point you're like, are you kidding me? Yeah. But okay, well, if I give $30, that's an entire class. That's more than an entire class has on in their yearly budget. So that's the kind of story you've got to tell. It's the impact, and it's back to the human. You've got to connect it to the human, whether it's these little kids or the parents or the teachers or the principals or whoever it is in their particular case. But they did such a fantastic job of telling those stories in that environment, at that event, that I was just, I just wanted to stand up and applaud. You did it right. You did it right.
The human being in me is moved, and the storyteller salutes you.
Exactly. Here's your gold star.
Here's your gold star. Exactly. Oh, that's a great story. And you said something that I think, as we sort of, go through this podcast and think about sort of, that sort of the arc is really, I think we're both really big fans of being human, and that starts with empathy, to your point. And your example is a beautiful one again, because it really is about, if I can leave just a couple thoughts with people who will watch this, it's your best story is told through the lens of your rabid fans and the people who have benefited from you. So sometimes you can be the hero of your own story. Sometimes it does not make sense. You are not. And sometimes the hero of your story is that, your customers are Batman, you're the Robin. And sometimes that's okay. You're the enabler. You don't have to be the focus. But through your work, you enabled, a Batman to rise. You enabled somebody to achieve something and be better. And when your customers are successful and you can tell those stories and let them tell those stories, you can't help but look wonderful. So I think that's such a powerful thing to storytelling, is you don't always have to be you shouldn't be the hero, I think, of your own story. Origin story maybe, but your other stories, I think, need to be somebody else's empathy.
Yeah. And, as much as I love Batman, and I do, my favorite comic book character of all time, but what's today's Wednesday? In 2 days, we'll be talking about Yoda or the characters from Star Wars, and be the Yoda. be your clients, be your customers Yoda.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the key.
He didn't say yoga, he said Yoda. I love that. Yeah, I know that's such a great, I love that because it's timely and it's fun, but it's such a great way to think about it, because along that hero's journey, there's got to be the teacher who helps, who aids and helps bring the hero up to his own realization or her realization of what they are capable of. So I really love that analogy. I think that's just a great place. I mean, what can you do? You can't, if you can't end it on a Star Wars metaphor, I just don't know what you can do. So there you go.
Yeah, about 36, 48 hours, whatever it is, before the next movie opens. That's what you got to do, right?
That's what you got to do. It's, I came home from shopping the other day, and I came home and my boys had lightsabers, and they were running around the house doing a duel, right, with their capes on, and they had the lightsabers going. So yeah, it's big in my house too. So we'll be I think we'll be seeing it. Jeff, where can people find you? I know you're everywhere. In fact, I'm going to give a shout out to Jeff right now, because he's the one who inspired me to do Periscope. And I was like, I gotta check this thing out. And I know Jeff is more seasoned, and he's out there doing a lot of scopes. So Jeff, tell everybody where they can experience you and what you're up to.
Well, I love to connect. I love to engage on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Periscope. So I'm at Jeff_Echols on all of those platforms. So, the line down below _ and other than that, you can go to my website, echoengage.com, just the shortening of Echo Engagement, which is down here at the bottom of the screen. And those are a couple places, but yeah, hit me up on Twitter. That's a really fast way, it pops up on the screen.
Yeah.
So, oh, look, but yeah, I love to engage on those platforms and have conversations there and join the scope. I usually do it 5 days a week.
Wow.
And talk about storytelling.
Yeah, I know Jeff is one of the most committed people I know doing Periscope and using it, and I think in a way that I think is really helpful. So I really applaud you, and I think that's great. Like I said, you inspired me. I've been a blabber, but I thought I got to try this Periscope thing and what that's all about. And it's always fun to talk to fellow storytellers like yourself, and I just have so much fun. And if you get a chance to check out one of his Periscopes, please do. I think it's a great way to pick up some quick tips and things like that. So Jeff, so much fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
I appreciate it. Always fun, Kathy.
Always fun. Everybody, you can catch me at keepingithuman.com, and I'm at Kathy Klotz-Guest with no hyphen on Twitter. All right. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday, and we'll chat soon.
You do the same. Thanks, Kathy.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.